And the native peoples
Like
of
right
the
here?
area. Well, there was a farm here, so the first attacks of the war took place east of the Kickamuit River on the farm of Joe Winslow, and this was his farm. Here.
Really?
Yeah. So within days, all 40 or so of the colonist houses were burned, but if you look down here, there was a well. If you go down by the bush path, there's a well right behind our school.
Really?
Yeah. You never knew that?
No.
No, I didn't know.
See? Welcome everybody here today, and thank Mr. Weed, who is spearheading recognition of the history of Warren in connection with the indigenous people that were prevalent, that lived, that thrived in this area before the colonists' arrival. So KMS, we should be proud, it figures into that history. The early founding of our state. This was a farm, and I'm going to let Mr. Weed explain a little bit about it, but be proud to be part of KMS, to be part of Kickamuit, and I'd like to thank you once again. We talked about this last August,
That's right.
so it's been almost a year
Yep.
in the making, but I'm finally happy that it's come to fruition for you and for the organization, and to recognize the contributions of the indigenous people to our town. So I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll step out for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for approving the installation of this marker. We've been working on this project for about 4 years, and this seemed to be the appropriate time to add this piece of our history. If you're familiar with what happened here in Warren, you know that people from Europe were not the first people to live here. Anybody know who used to live here?
The Indians.
Yeah, what was their name?
Native Americans.
Pardon me? Well, that's a general term. Has anybody heard the term Pokanoket? Yeah, okay, good.
Peters, where do you live?
I live on
You live
Pokanoket
on
Trail.
Pokanoket
There you
Trail.
go, Pokanoket Trail, just down the way there. Right. So you've heard of Pokanoket before, okay? So that's the name to learn, because that's the name of the people who are here. And in a few minutes, you're going to get to meet a few people, okay? So what you need to know is that what happened here changed everything right here on this spot, because when the Pilgrims first came, does anybody recall who they met when they came here in 1620?
Was it Christopher Columbus?
Say it again?
Christopher Columbus.
No, that was long after Christopher Columbus. Yeah. Have you heard the Massasoit Usamiquan? Okay, that's another term you need to hear. Pokanoket. It was the Pokanoket Massasoit. Massasoit means chief, and Usamiquan was his name, and it means yellow feather. Usamiquan. He lived here. Okay, somewhere over in the town village here. He had a settlement here. But when the Pilgrims came in 1620, he kept an eye on them for a while to see what they were going to do. And then in March of 1621, he walked the 42 miles to Plymouth. Anybody walked 42 miles to Plymouth? Okay, it's a long ways. But he came with 60 of his warriors and met with the Pilgrims there, and struck an agreement with the governor that the English would not harm them and they would not harm the English. That treaty stood for his entire life and guaranteed that the English would survive and eventually thrive in this area. Were it not for that treaty, none of us would be here. That treaty held all that time. In 1632, they built a trading post down here on the Kickamuit River. Anybody think of what they might be trading at the time? What would the English want? Furs, right. So there's a fur trading post here. And what would the Pokanokets want from the English? What's that?
Maybe like guns.
Guns and knives and pots and blankets and things that they did not have. So by trading furs for those things, the Pokanokets thrived here as well. And things went along quite well for quite some time. In 1636, Roger Williams. Anybody ever heard of Roger Williams? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, he came right through here in 1636 in the winter, January of 1636, because they kicked him out of Salem. So he was coming down here looking for a place, and he knew Usamequin. They were friends when Williams was first in Plymouth. So when he had to leave Salem, he came down to meet with his friend Usamequin right here in where Warren is now. And Usamequin sheltered him because he was deathly ill from hiking 60 miles in the middle of a cold January. And Usamequin sheltered him in his winter settlement in a place called Margaret's Rock. That's just on the other side of the Swansea line in Warren. That happened here. In 1642, a group from Weymouth came down and settled the area around the Rumford part of East Providence, where the Newman Church is. That's not the original church, but that's the location where the first settlement, English settlement in this area occurred. And then a group from the Newman Church broke off and set up a church up at here in Barrington now. It was Swansea at the time, where the first Baptist church was formed here. That was formed by a minister from Wales in England, who was brought over here for that church. That became the first church for Swansea. Swansea was sold, the land, all the way from the river down here, the Warren River, all the way to the Taunton River, was sold in 1653. It was the Soames Purchase. Anybody heard the name Soames? S-O-W-A-M-S? That word there?
Is that him?
Well, no, this is Usamequin, okay? But Soames was the name of his village. And if you look at Warren Town Hall, the next time you go by Warren Town Hall, look up above. It will say Soames 1621. Yep. So this town has always known that Usamequin lived here and welcomed the Pilgrims and helped them be successful. Well, unfortunately, they got more and more successful and had children and wanted to provide land for them so they could farm. And all this area began to fill up with farms, including a farm right here on this property with Job Winslow. There were other farms in the area. In 1677, a man called Hugh Cole. Does that name ring a bell? Cole? It should. That's Hugh Cole Road over there. Hugh Cole was born in Plymouth. His parents came over in 1630. He grew up in Plymouth, but when he was 37, he came down here and built a house on the Cole River. Anybody know where that is? That's over in Swansea, okay? And the location of that house, called Riverby, is still there. It's a new house on top of where the old house was. But Hugh was living over there. Well, what do you suppose happened after all these English people came here and everybody wanted a farm and gave their kids more land and more land and more land? What was happening to the Pokanokets? Where were they going? Yeah, out. They didn't have a place to go. All of them ended up retreating down into the Bristol Peninsula. In fact, there used to be a fence right along Child Street that went from the Kickamuit River to the Warren River to keep the English cattle and pigs out. because they would wander into the cornfields that the Pokanoket had for their food and destroy them. Well, when that kept going on over and over again, and then all kinds of things were happening in the courts that were not fair, and people were losing, the Pokanoket people were losing their land and their liberty, and some of them their lives. What happens when someone invades a country? You're seeing it on TV now. Pardon me? A war, right. The war is because people do not want to be invaded. They want their homeland back. And the Pokanoket people here wanted their land back, and they saw it disappearing. So it started by looting some of the farms around here. Eventually a 12-year-old, anybody here 12? Shot one of them, okay? And drew blood, and that opened the war. And before you know it, houses were being burned in an attempt to get the English to leave, to go back to England, okay? So that's what happened here. And how did the war go? Bad. Bad for who? It went bad for the Pokanokets, and it went bad for the English, okay? It was a terrible war. Lots of people died, and nobody was happy after that war. Does anybody know how the war ended? It started right here, and it ended down in Bristol. Anybody have an idea where? Has anybody been to Mount Hope Farm in Bristol? Yeah, you can go there tomorrow. There's a whole event going on there, and you can learn a little bit more from members of the Pokanoket tribe who will be there. But Mount Hope was where Philip. Who's Philip? Who's King Philip, by the way?
He's the king of Britain.
He was the king of England. That's what everybody thinks. Doesn't it sound like he would be the king of England to have that name? Well, that's not his name. His name was Metacom. Metacom. He was Usamequin's son, his second oldest son, who, when Usamequin died in 1661, first his older son took over, and then he was poisoned and died, and then his younger son took over. He asked to have his name changed to King Philip. Why would a native person want an English name of a king?
We have a bad reputation.
Again?
We have a bad reputation.
Yeah, well, he was a king of his people, and the people here kept talking about the king in England. So if you have a king, we have a king. So King Philip became his name. He got an alliance to lead a rebellion that almost succeeded in getting the English out of here, but they ran out of food and ammunition. And eventually Philip was slain down at Mount Hope, and within a few months the war was over. What happens when a war is over and people don't like the losers? Yeah, they kill them, or they enslave them, or they drive them out, and that's what happened here. And that's why when people say, well, where are those people? Where are the Pokanokets? Well, they weren't allowed to live here. They were forced out, but they survived. And you're going to meet two of them right now, and they're going to tell you the rest of the story. So, any questions here? Yeah, they're going to tell you how they survived. So come on over here. We have the sachem of the tribe, and you're going to say your name because I still have trouble pronouncing it.
Quini, I am Hokumakwakanakas. That means dancing star in my language. And I would like to welcome you to Solons. This is the homeland of the Pokanoket tribe, and my people have existed for well over 10,000 years before the colonists came. The Creator put my people here as the caretakers of this land, and I just want to pay respect to my ancestors who did just that. They took care of this land and everything on it, and lived in peace, harmony, and balance with everything in it. And I would also like to just pay respect for the Pokanoket people today who are still doing that so that we all benefit from the lands and waters of Solons, which is Barrington, Warren, Bristol, East Providence, Rehoboth, Seekonk, and Swansea. So again, I just want to welcome you. Wow, Dave, he told you a lot of history in just a little bit of time. That's a lot, and it's going to take a long time to kind of digest that. But I just want you to know that the history of this land is so important, and where you live is so important in the history in the history of what has happened here in America, and you should know that history. So, I really want you to take time and to really learn about the land on which you live. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to the son-in-law, Pawampi Neapaw.
She said, I'm Pawampi Neapaw, and that's Winter Thunder in my language. I'm the 10th generation great-grandson of the Massasoit. Massasoit is a title. It means great leader. He was the great leader of one of the largest Indian nations in colonial America. And his son, that's my 10th generation great-grandson, his son Philip, met a convert in Galway. That's my 9th generation great-grandfather. And then I have a 6th generation great-grandfather who was George Washington's hand-picked bodyguard when George Washington came to Patchogue, Connecticut, to take control. He was going to take over the Revolutionary forces. He was at an inn there, and my great-grandfather, Simeon Simons, I don't know if you ever heard of that, but he was out there wrestling with all of George Washington's men, and George Washington called him in, wanted to know who he was, and he's enlisted in the Continental Army, received a pension from the United States government as a Continental soldier, and served all through the Revolutionary War with George Washington, and then went to live with him for 2 years before he went back to Connecticut. That's King Philip's great-grandson. That's my 6th generation great-grandfather. That's my line coming out. And I am the Sagamore of the nation. A lot of people never heard of Pokanoket, and the reason being is because during the King Philip War, the name Pokanoket was outlawed by the colonial government. And if you were a male 14 years of age or older, you said you were Pokanoket, they kill you on sight. So you didn't say you were Pokanoket. That's when they started calling us Wampanoag. And Wampanoag is a term that means Easterners. And that's what the Indians, further south and whatnot, they refer to us as Easterners, and that's what Wampanoag means. But in order to be called Wampanoag, you had, according to the Massachusetts Archaeological Society, you had to fight the King Philip War against the colonists. And not all of the tribes that call themselves Wampanoag today fought in that war. And a lot of people, you should be proud of your history because this is where it all started. It didn't start down in Cape. This is where the Massasoit lived, in Solons. And the Pokanoket tribe, because he was head of a large nation, there were over 60 tribes, bands and clans, but the Pokanoket tribe lived in Solons, which was Swansea, Rehoboth, Seekonk, and there was no Barrington, Warren, but now it's Barrington, Warren, Bristol. And there was no East Providence then. East Providence was part of Seekonk, so a lot of these lines have changed. But this treaty that the Massasoit signed was right down there on, what is that street? That street where Mount Seafood is? Water Street. Yeah, thank you. That's where they actually signed the treaty, which was part of Bristol at that time, I guess until, what, 1740, yeah, something like that, yeah. So basically, you should be proud of your history, because it all started here in New England. That's why they call us New England. That's Old England across the pond. This is New England, but the history of this country started right here. And that treaty was forged and lasted over 54 years because of the Massasoits, the control over all these chiefs that honored him. That treaty lasted 54 years until King Philip determined that that he wasn't sharing his land, he was losing it, and that's why he went to war, because of an encroachment. So Pokanoket in 2015, I everything I do, the United States government says Wampanoag now. It doesn't say Wampanoag anymore. Anyone who wants to call themselves Wampanoag, they can. I took back the original name, and that goes all the way back to the treaties that we had with the Crown of England. And that's one of the reasons why I did it. But that's all I'm going to say, because they tell me I talk too
So,
much.
now you all know who Usamequin was. Okay. You all know who King Philip was. You all know where Soames is, right? Okay. Those are the things we want you to
I told him there's a
retain.
quiz on Monday.
There you go. We'll have a quiz. Okay. So thank you all. We won't take. Right. I know you have to get back. I'd like you to just circle, turn around, and then circle around the sign, and we'll get a picture for the newspaper there. Okay.
Thanks for that picture of King Philip. I like that one better than the
Oh
one
yeah.
that Paul reversed.
Good. Yeah.
Huskies on 3. 1, 2, 3. Huskies!
Yeah.